Hi everyone, welcome to this tutorial on Microsoft Excel. So we will learn about functions and formulas, we will learn about conditional formatting, data validation, pivot chart and pivot table. Now let's look at a scenario here. So one day in a startup, one professional speaks that their business is growing and they would need an efficient way to work with the data. They would have to find a way to work faster with storing and analyzing data. Now, to that, another colleague responds, well, we can make use of Microsoft Excel to do this job. The question is, will Excel be able to cater to their business needs? Now, the colleague responds, well, we can make use of Excel in several ways, and it also is a cost efficient option. Now, in that case, the colleague who posed the question says, let's go ahead with Excel and let's train our employees in Excel. And the suggestion is welcomed, which would make the job easier for them. And they would basically decide on using Excel. So they decide on taking a training right away and basically starting to learn Excel. Now, before we move to Excel, one of the question is, why should we use Excel? So let's look at some of the points here. So Excel proves to be a great platform to perform various mathematical calculation on large data sets, which is one of the biggest requirements of various organizations these days. Various features in Excel like searching, sorting, filtering makes it easier for you to play with the data. And Excel also allows you to beautify your data and present it in the form of charts, tables, and data bars. Now, when it comes to reporting, accounting, and analysis can be performed with the help of Excel. It can help you with your task lists, your calendars, and goal planning worksheets. Excel also provides good security for your data. Excel files have the feature of password protection. This way, your information can be safe. Now, when we talk about what is Excel and how it can be used, so Excel, or you might have heard as spreadsheet, can be basically used for a lot of different tasks than just storing the information in so-called tabular format. Now, Microsoft Excel is an application that is used for recording, analyzing, and visualizing data. It is in the form of a spreadsheet. Let's have a look at few of the functions and formulas used in Excel. And before we do that, we can also quickly take a small tour to understand how to work with Excel. Now, to do that, what we can do is we can type in our search, say for example Excel, and just select your Excel app which is installed. And here you see you have a lot of options which says take a tour, drop down list, get started with formulas, make your pivot table, going forward with pie charts, and much more. So we can click on this one which says take a tour, and that basically pops up a window which says welcome to Excel. And if you have always wanted to be better at Excel, you have this which can help you. So let's click on create, and that takes us to the store window. Now that says instructions for screen readers, which basically talks about 10 different steps in which we can learn Excel and using the spreadsheet app. So there are more than 11 sheets which we see here at the bottom end, and each one gives us a simple example which we can work on. So for example, if I click on add, now that takes me to this page which says how do we add numbers. Now you might be provided data which we can upload by loading a file from our machine or getting data from a web source or even connecting to a database. So there are various options which we will see in some time. So here we have an option which is called data. You can click on this one, and this basically has options where you can use existing connections. If you have created some, you can always click on from other sources, and you can get your data from SQL Server, from analysis services, from OData data feed. You can get in from XML, from data connection wizard, or also from Microsoft Query. You can be running in different queries here, which shows up in the option which says new query. There are connections which you can use, and that basically will display all the connections for this particular workbook, which we do not have as of now, but we can create them. But let's look at simple examples. Now you can follow these instructions here, which says basically adding up the numbers, and that could be easily done by just placing your cursor here. And what you could do is either you can type in the formula, that is from which row to which row you would want to add the data. So for example, I could just do a sum here, and that shows up all the different functions which are available. Then we can open up a parenthesis, and we can say I would be interested in totaling the amount from column D, and I would select, for example, D4. So I could be doing this, and then I could say D4 onwards till D7. So that's the data which I'm interested in. You can close your parenthesis and hit enter, and that gives you the total. There is also a shortcut for this, which you can always do, is we can first delete this, and you can just place your cursor here and just use your alt and equals. That automatically selects the numericals, which we can anytime expand or basically collapse. So I will basically select this, which says this function needs two numbers, which is number 1 and number 2, and then you can hit on enter, and that gives you the total. So similarly, we can be getting in the data here by selecting all the fields. So here it also says that you can use a shortcut. Now what we can also do is we can add numbers over 50 by selecting the yellow cell here and then giving a condition such as, so I can basically use something like sum if, and then open a parenthesis. I can select I would be interested in this row, and then I can even drag and drop till here. So that tells me D11 to D15. You can then put in a comma here, and you can give your condition. Say for example, we would say I would be interested in numbers only above 50, and we can select this, close your quotes, and then just close your parenthesis, and that's your formula. So you can do this, and that basically gives me the total is 100. Now similarly, we could do that for the amount here. I could select this. Now there is also an option, I can click on home, and I can go for something like auto sum. So that's one more way of doing it, which anyway says sum is alt plus equals. So it automatically adds up your values, and I can try doing a auto sum that automatically selects my rows, and then I can get my total. Now as per this activity here, it says try adding another sumif formula here, but add amounts that are less than 100, and the result should be 160. So what we can do is we can basically select all the numbers which are lesser than 100. So the way we did earlier here, there can be always a shortcut. So you can always, for example, if you would want to avoid typing in the formula, you can always copy it from here and then just hit on enter. So you are back into this cell, and then I can basically go here and paste the number, and then as per the requirement, we are required to select anything which is lesser than 100. So what I could do is I could select here, I could say let's say G, and then I can change this value to G15, and that's one more way. Now we see our selected rows have been changed, so I can hit on enter, and I can check what is the result. So we would be interested in looking for numbers which are lesser than 100. So I will have to also change this one to a lesser sign, and that basically gives me the total, which is 160. So that's how you can simply add numbers. You can use auto sum, you can type in the formula, you can select the fields, or you can just place your cursor where you would be looking for a sum, and then you can just do a alt equals, and that basically populates the sum. Now let's look at some easy options of filling your cells or automatically populating the values in your cells within your Excel sheet. Now here we have an option which says 100. Now we can click on this, and that basically says it is making a sum of column C4 to D4. So if I click on this one, I can check that this is row number 4, which shows up here, and I also know this is column C. I also have D, so this equals is basically giving me a sum of C4 to D4. Now what we can do is we can always place our cursor here at the right corner, and then we can just drag and drop, and this basically gives me a total of all the numbers for all different rows. So this is one shortcut which we can do to get the total. Excel will automatically give the totals, which we call as filling down. Now what we can do is, in the same way, if we would want to get the totals here, we can first check what is this 200, and this tells me it is C11 to C14 total. So it is totaling the rows from C11, so column C and 11th row till 14th row, and that's the sum. Now what I can also do is I can similarly, like above, we can do a filling right, which basically means bringing your cursor here and then just dragging and dropping it all the way where you would need the totals, and this basically gives me the total. There is one more quick way to check if this is right. So the easiest option would be to select this cell. Now what I can also do is I can just select all of these fields by just highlighting and selecting all the fields. Once it is selected, press on Control R, and that gives you the total. Now if we would be doing this top down, then I could select all these rows for this particular column, and then I could do a Control D. So that's your filling down, and this one was filling right. So this is an easier option of doing a fill when you would want to have the formula applied to every row as it occurs in the first row or the last row. We could test this by, for example, selecting these fields. I could delete them, and I have here which says 130. I could just place my cursor here and I could drag it all the way up, and that should also do the same magic which we were seeing from top down. So this is a simple way wherein you can fill up your cells, and you can also automatically propagate or move your computation to all the cells. Let's look at the split option, which basically helps us in splitting the data when we have some kind of pattern or when we have some kind of delimiters in our data in, say, one particular column, and we would want to derive the values out of it. So we can always use the splitting option. Now the easiest option would be, so for example, we have our email column which has the email IDs, and which we can clearly see has a first name dot last name. Now I see that there is a last name Smith filled up here, first name is empty. So what I can also do is I can just type in, say, Nancy here. Now that's the first name. I can again start typing the second name, and as soon as you do that, you would see a faded list of numbers, and that's your clue to hit enter. And once you do that, you would see all the first names have been filled in here. If you would want to maintain the case sensitiveness, you can just go ahead and delete these, and let's type in as it occurs. So let's say Nancy as the first name. Go down to the next cell and just type in Andy, and there is your grade list. So just hit on enter, and that basically fills up your first name. What we can also do is we can just select this particular field, and either we can type in Control E, which basically fills up all the options. Now I can just do a undo by typing in or clicking Control Z, and that's basically gone. What I can also do is I can select a particular field, and then I can go into Home option, and under Home you have an option here which says Fill. So you can select this, and then you can do a flash fill, which is what we are doing here. So click on flash fill, and that automatically fills up the values. So in this way you can work within your spreadsheet, and you can be filling up the values where a delimiter by default is understood, and we can split the data. Now however, sometimes you might have some data which has a different kind of delimiter, and there is again a smarter way of splitting your data. So you can always scroll down here, and that says splitting a column based on delimiters. So we have some values in the data column, and these values in each row are separated by comma. So select this. Your data is already selected. Text to columns, delimited, comma is selected, and now click on next. So it basically says what is the destination. Let's select this one, and I can choose what would you want to have. So that shows me this would be my data preview. Now I can basically select this one. I can say finish and say OK. And now if you see, our data has been placed in the columns appropriately. So this is how you can split your data based on a delimiter and then organize your data in a better way. Now there are some advanced options which we can learn later, but this basically tells about using a formula. So this is something, if we have some name in one cell, and if you would want to split it into first name, your helper column, your middle name, last name, so that can also be done using formulas. And this basically tells how would you extract characters from your left cell and how would you place them in your right cell. So you can try this activity, which is a little more of advanced option. The benefit is that you can always use this, wherein if you do some kind of transformation using your formulas, if your original data gets updated, then the split data will also get updated. And that's the benefit of using formulas, where you can place values from one cell into multiple cells based on execution of your details in the formulas. How about using the transpose option? Now, you might have heard of situations where you would want to switch or turn your rows into columns and your columns into rows, and that's where transposing comes into picture. It might be useful when you have your data in your X and Y axis, or as I would say in rows and columns, and you would want to switch your rows to become the columns and columns to become your rows. So what we can do is, the simplest way is you can select all your values. So here we basically have 6 columns and I would say 2 rows. Now I can select all of these, and then I can select an empty field. For example, the one which is highlighted here. Well, you can always do a Control Alt V. That's a shortcut. What you can also do is, once you have selected all your fields, you can just copy them. So just do a Control C and then click on an empty cell, and then what you can do is you can do a special paste or paste special. So under your home you have the paste option, and here you can go for paste special. And once you do that, you need to select the transpose option over here and click on OK. And now you will see that the columns and the rows have been transposed. So your row name was item, and that has become the column heading. You had row name as amount, and that has become the column heading, and all your values have been transposed in this particular format. Now there is another way of doing that, and again that's using your formulas. So what you can do is you can transpose with a formula also, and that basically works when you have similar kind of data. So this has 6 columns and basically 2 rows. So you can basically do this. So you can select this, and earlier we were doing a copy, but now what we would want to do is we would want to just look at the row numbers, which tells me it is C33, C34, and it starts with C and ends in with your H column. So what we can do is we know that we have 6 columns and 2 rows. So transposing that would actually give me 2 columns and 6 rows. So what we can do is we can select 2 columns and 6 rows in our Excel sheet. I can then basically start typing in the message, or I can just go to the address bar, and here I can say transpose. Let's go for C33, H34. It basically selects my data, and now I can just do a Control Shift and enter, and now if you see, all the values have been populated. Now you can just place your cursor in one of the cells, but if you see the address bar, the formula remains the same. This is because this is an array formula. So we can read more about an array formula here. It's basically something which performs calculations on more than one cell in an array. And in the example here, the array is the original data, that is C33 to H34. So your transpose is just changing the horizontal orientation to the vertical orientation. So this is a very simple way in which you can basically use the Excel's capability to transpose your data and convert your rows into columns and columns into rows. Apart from working on additions, subtractions, filling up your data, sorting the data, or basically splitting your data, transposing your data, one of the other requirements is sorting and filtering your data. Now that can be very handy when you're working on huge data and you would want to sort it in a particular order, say ascending or descending, or might be based on a particular field, or if that field was, or if the cell was highlighted with a particular color, sorting the data. So let's look at how Excel can be used for sorting and filtering. Examples are pretty simple here. So let's check that. So if we go into sort and filter and say this is the data I have, say for example, I would want to sort the values in the department column alphabetically. So what I can do is I can select department column, and I'm already in the home tab. I can straight away go here which says sort and filter. I can then say sort A to Z, and that's basically alphabetically sorting your department column. And once I do this, you would see the data has been sorted, but it's not just this data. We can just do a Control Z and check what are the values we have. So here we have meat, which is beef, and 90,000, 110,000, the values. Then you have bakery, which should ideally be the first row if we sort it in an alphabetical order, which goes with bakery as desserts. You have the values, so we can check this again. So select department and then just do a sort and filter, and let's say sort A to Z. And if you see, the data has changed, but it's not just in changing your first column, but then it has taken care of all the data. However, the data has been sorted based on the department column. So you have bakery, which aligns with desserts, which has the values, and now we have all the data which has been filtered. Now what we can also do is we can sort December's amounts from largest to smallest. So what we can do is we can basically click any cell in the December column, let's say 20,000, and then what I can do is I can go into sort filter, and then I can say sort largest to smallest. So if you see, bakery breads is the row which has the smallest data, or might be you have deli sandwiches, so that one looks also smaller. So let's do a larger to smallest, and if I do this, you would see the values have been shifted now. So it is no more based on the department column, because now the data is being sorted based on the values in the December column. And you see bakery, which was alphabetically the first one, has become second last. So either you can sort the data based on a department column, which goes based on the values. These are all string values or words. So it sorts alphabetically. If you have numbers, might be you can give some values and you can sort the data. You could anytime do a custom sort, and you could basically select if you would want to select the data. So I could do a custom sort, and then I could choose which is the column which we would want to use for sorting, what is the sorting needs to be done, is it cell values, is it cell color, font color, conditional formatting, and then you can also choose the order. So that's one more way to do that. Now, if you scroll down, that also shows how you can sort by date or a color. So for example, if you would want to sort based on the expense date, so there are different options. So what I can do is I can select this date field. I can just do a right click. I can go into sort, and then I can choose. I would want to sort oldest to newest. So since I selected the date field, it basically has sorted all the data, and it has taken the expense date into consideration. Now there are these filters which you see on the row headings. We could have also used those. So I could have selected this, and that basically says or mentions which are the dates I would be interested in looking at. I also have sort by color here. I can do a sort oldest to newest or newest to oldest. So I could also use these filters which have been applied here. Now we have the data which is in color. So if I would want to basically select the color columns or color cells, I could select this. I can basically do a right click here, and when I go into sort, I could choose put selected color or cell color on the top, and that basically will make sure that my data is sorted, and it has also sorted that in a descending order. So in this way you can sort or basically filter your data. What we can also do is we can add filters. So sometimes we can go for formulas which we would want to use. What we can also do is we can basically select the filter which has been applied here. Now how does the filter come in there? So if I would select a particular row, I could select a particular row, and then I could decide if I would want to just add a filter to this one. And that's how the filter has come in. So we have the filter. What we can do is we can basically click on this drop down, and then you have something like number filters. So we can always go here. We can basically choose one of these. So we can basically choose above average. So I could select this, and then basically it shows me the values. We could also delete the filter by clicking on this one, and we could say, well, I'm not interested in this filter anymore. So I could clear the filter, and that shows me all the values. Or I could say that let's click on some other field, for example food. I can go in here, I can go into number filters, and then I could say, well, I'm interested in values which are below average, above average, might be greater than, and then I can choose what is the value. So for example, if we say I'm interested in food which is greater than $25, I could give a value here. I could say okay, and now I have applied the filter. Similarly, you can select this, and then you can just clear your filter and your data is back. So remember, no data is lost. It is just hidden, or basically based on the filter not shown. So that's good enough for us. And in this way, you can sort and filter the data. So for more details, obviously in all these sheets, you have the links which point to more information on the web, and you can always refer to these. So this is simple way in which you can sort and filter any amount of data which has been stored within your Excel within a particular sheet. Now that we have learned about add, fill, split, transpose, sorting, and filtering, it will also be good to learn how to work with tables, or basically converting your data into a tabular format and then doing some easy computations. So click on this tables option here. Now here we see there is some data which is in 5 columns and n number of rows. So I can basically select this data, and then what I can do is I can insert, choose the table option, and then it says my table has headers, and we'll be okay with that. I'll say okay, and now if you see, this is the table created. It basically has different filters which we have learned earlier how to use, and this is basically my table, which is a collection of cells which has some special features. So we can easily add rows to this table, we can add columns to this table, and we can even do some calculations. So for example, here I can click on this one. I can basically enter some field, and then I can hit on enter, and we see that this row has been inserted, wherein we can easily fill in values. For example, I would say chocolates. I could give some value here, size 25,000, might be 35,000, and then basically I can give in some values here. Now what you can also do is you can continue adding rows in this way, and say for example you would want more columns, so you can select this option here in the top bottom right corner. You can just drag it towards the right, and that basically has automatically created columns for my next months, wherein I can feed in the data. So this is a simpler way wherein you can keep adding more rows and columns to your data if that has been converted in a tabular format. Now let me just do a Control Z, that basically deletes the columns. Again, Control Z deletes the last row which we added, and I can stop here, or I can even remove my values by doing multiple Control Z and removing my rows. So this is how I converted my data into a table, and then I can easily work on this. What I can also do is I can do some calculations. So what we can do, we have a table here, we have a total field, and what we can do is we can just select one cell here. Now as we have learned earlier, we can do a alt and then equals, and that basically says what is this doing. So it says it is calculating the sum of the last 3 months, and if that's what you would want to do, just hit on enter, and it has automatically calculated the totals for all your rows for these 3 columns. So the sum formula is getting filled up. Now I can select any particular cell and I can look in my address bar. So it has already given me the formula where it has started calculating the sum from the October column till the December column, and has given me the calculated values of the columns. What we can also do is we can get total rows in the table. Now that's a simpler option. So what we can do is we can select any cell in this particular table, and then we see that there is a table tools design option showing up here. Now I can select this, and then it says, well, let's get a total row. So let's select this, and it automatically populates the total here. And if you would want the average, then we could select this, and from the drop down I can select what I'm interested in. So for example, I would want the average values and not the total. I could just select this, and that gives me the average of these values. So we can always do simpler computations here by converting our data into table format. Let's learn about one more efficient way of working with the data, and that's using your drop downs. So let's see how drop downs work here. Now Say for example, you have this data which has the values in the food column and department is empty, and say for example you would want to enter the values in department, however you would want to select that department should either have produce or meat and bakery, and these are the only three options which should be available for any user to fill in the values. How do we do that? So we can basically create a table by pressing Control D. So what I can do is under my department here, I can select one of the cells and then I can do a Control T that basically converts this into a table. I can say OK and my table is created. Now what I can do is once this part is done, we can select all the blank fields here where we would want this drop down to be applicable. Now under your data tab, you can go in and select data validation, and this has an option called data validation. Click on this, which basically says allow any value. So here I will select I would want to give a list of values, and then I can type in my values here, which I can say produce, say for example meat, and then say bakery. Now these are the values, so we can click on OK. And once we have done that, we basically have a drop down here next to apples, which will only show us the values which we can feed in under the department column. So I can go into every cell and then I can basically choose what is the department which handles this, and then basically I can select one of these from the drop down. So this is an easier option of creating your drop down and then feeding in the values from the set of values which you have defined here on the right. So this is a simple example of using your drop downs, working with your tables, working with your sort and filter, transpose, split, filling up your data, adding in some data here. And similarly, you can use Excel for more than one use case using its inbuilt features to easily work with your data. Let's see how we can import data or bring in data into our Excel from your local machine or from an external web source. So what we can do is we can open up a blank Excel sheet and say, for example, you have been provided a text file or a CSV file and you would want to import that data into your Excel sheet. That can be easily done. So right now I've opened an Excel sheet. Now I can click on data, and here I have an option which says existing connections from other data sources. So, or you can click on connections if you have already created some. So we can click on from other sources. So this is one option where you can connect to your different data sources and you can get the data from one of these. What we can also do is I can click on connections. Now it says there is none. I can click on add. It says, well, show the connections where connection files on network, connection files on this computer. So I can say, let's get some files from this computer. Now, if that does not show up something, so say browse for more, and that basically shows you different options. So let's basically select a folder where I have some data sets. I'll click in here, and this is basically a folder where I have some data sets. Now let me select this particular file, and I know it is a CSV file. So let's click on open. Now if you would want to verify this, you could have gone and looked into the properties of the file, and it says it is a .csv file, which is what we are interested in. So I'll take this file, I'll say open. Now this basically shows me the text import wizard option, which says is the file delimited. I'll say yes, click on next. So I will select comma as my delimiter. I can say text qualifier is none. Now this is my data. So my data preview is already showing me the data is what is the data in the CSV file. You can click on next. and then you have an option which says data format is general. You can go for date format, you can go for advanced options. So I'll just say finish, and basically now this has been created here. So we basically have this, and now I can click on close. Now once you have done that, you can click on existing connections. It shows me the data which we have here, the connection which we have created, say open, and then it says, do you want to import this data or bring this data into existing worksheet? You can also say add this to a data model if you are doing some data modeling. So click on OK, and now this data is automatically inserted in my Excel file. I can basically save it into this particular sheet. Now what we can also do is we can also start a new sheet, and that does not have a data, and we can get some other data from web. So what I can do is I can go into my GitHub, and let's say I would be interested in this CSV file. So I can select this, and this is my GitHub path, a path on web. So I can click on raw, and that basically gives me the raw path where this particular file is. Now you can select this, copy this particular path, and here you can come back to your Excel sheet. We would be interested in getting the data from web, might be from a text file where we will have to specify the delimiters, or let's go to web, and here I can give in the web path from where I would be interested in getting the file. Let's give the GitHub path which is publicly available, and then click on import. Now once you click on import, it tells me there are two fields, data and value. These are within double quotes separated by comma. So first let's click on import. Now once we do this, it will basically get the data from web and put in here. It says existing worksheet, so we had already created a new worksheet. So let's click on OK, and now you have the data coming in, but then this basically shows me in one particular field. So what we can also do is we can just do a Control A, that selects all my columns here, and that's my data. So we can then basically filter this out. So we can say text to columns. It's a delimited file. Click on next. We can select comma and let the text qualifier be quotes. It shows me data preview. Click on next. So you have the general format. It shows the destination, that's the column. Click on finish, and now your data has been split, and you have the data which you have imported from web. So this is the data which is coming in from web. This is the data which came in from my local machine. And similarly, we can even create connection with an existing database. So I can basically click on connections if I would want to do that. So I have an option called connection here, and it says where the selected connections are used. I can basically click on add. I can basically choose if I would want to get the files from network or from computer like we did earlier. I can click on browse for more, which should show me different other options to create connections. Say you would want to create a new SQL server connection. You can connect to a new data source coming in from different place. You could basically choose what kind of connection would you want. So these are all the different options which we can go for, and we can basically connect to a database. For example, if I have some database and say for example access database, I can see if there are some files with that particular database and I can import it. So similarly, we can also click in here which says new query, and that also gives you an option of getting the data from your files, from all these folders, from databases. So you can basically click here and then you can import data from a MySQL database, provided that is set up on your local machine or on a particular server. You can go from cloud, you can get it from online services, you can get it from other sources which says from web, from your Hadoop file system, from Active Directory, from a blank query, and you can even combine queries wherein you can run a Power Query editor. You can get the data from different sources, and then you can bring it into your Excel. So in this way, you can get your data from different sources into your Excel, into your spreadsheet, and then you can continue working on those data sets. We have already learned some basic operations which you can do in Excel, and let's implement our knowledge by working on this particular data which is coming in from housing data set. Now here, if we see some fields, we have agent, date listed, area, list price, and this is basically the data which has been sorted in newest to oldest order of date listed. So how do we arrive at this? So what I can do is I can just click on data listed, and then I can either go in here, I can select sort, I can get into custom sort, and then I can choose the column based on which I would want to sort the data. So I would look for the newest data to the oldest data. That means that would be in a descending order of dates, or you could say the oldest date or the earliest month will be towards the lower side of your sheet. So here we can select date listed. Now I can say let it sort based on cell values and the order what we have here. So we have newest to oldest. So let's select this. I can say OK. And now if you see, the date has been sorted. So we have your 10/18/2007 on the top. So that seems to be the latest date. And as we go down, we will see an earlier month or an earlier month than that in this date listed. So we have sorted our data into newest to oldest order, and that's based on your date column. So the result shows up here. Now what we can also do is we can have different questions which we would want to answer. So for example, I would want to sort the data in ascending order of area and descending order of agent name. How do we do that? So let's look into this. So this is here. I already have the result here. And how did I get this? So I'm looking for ascending order of area and descending order of agent name. So we can start with any particular column, that does not matter. So for example, if I look into this Excel sheet, I have my agent name, select this, which we want in a descending order. So we could either do a sort and then go for descending sort Z to A. We could also use the filter option here on the top right, and we could do it, or I could just say sort Z to A, and then it has arranged the data based on the agent column being in descending order. Now I can go into area, and then I can again do a sort, and I wanted my area column to be used for sorting the data in ascending to descending. And that basically not only changes the order of this particular column but for my complete data. So let's do that. And now if you see, we have the data which has been sorted. So we can see how many values we have here and the area values which we see, and this is how you get your result. So I'll just do a Control Z and again, and I'm back to my original data, and this is the sorted result which we are seeing at. Similarly, we can answer other questions. For example, sort the data according to the following order of area. That is, we are saying county, central, and then your county. So we can basically choose in which particular way we would want to do it. So it is county, central, and then again county. So if I look into my sheet 3, so here I basically have my data which is having some South County, then you have your central, and then you have your North County. So we would want to sort the data to solve our problem, which is according to the following order. So first we go for area, then we go for South County, Central, and North County. So what we can do is we can basically have area field selected, and I would want to sort this particular data. So I have South County, Central, and North County. So I can basically go for custom sort, and then I can choose which is the value or column which I'm interested in. Let's go for area. We will go for something like cell values. Well, you can also try to explore conditional formatting icon if this is what you would want to use, or we can basically go for just cell values. And here we can say if I would be interested in first getting my values for South County. So for example, I can say custom list, and then I can basically give in the new list here. So I can say S dot county, and then I would want central, and then I would want North County. So let's select this as it exists. We can basically say add, and that's basically the order which we want. Say OK, and then say OK here. And now what we would want is we would want our data, so we can compare that with the values which we see here. It starts with Kelly. You have in the 12th row something like Lang, and that's what we are doing. So we can basically arrange the data in a particular order by choosing a custom list and then sorting your data. So that's one more simpler task what we have done, where we have sorted the data in the order where under our area column, we first wanted South County, then we wanted central data, and then we wanted North County. So this is how you can do it. Now, let's look into one more problem. So it says find all the houses in the central area, and we would want to basically apply a regular filter. Let's see how do we do that. So we can click on this, and here we have the data. So the problem statement is we would want to find all the houses in central area. Now how do we do that? We can do a sorting, but we would want to use the filter which you see here is implemented. So how do you do it? So you can select this area, and say for example I would want to apply filter. I can just go in here and I can say let's get a filter on my first row, and now I have filters applied. So we are interested in looking into the central area houses. Let's go in here. It says all these fields are selected. That means it shows everything wherein your area has all these values. Let's unselect this, and then I will only be interested in the central. So let's say OK, and then say OK. So now you see the area filter has been applied, and we are looking at the central column. So what we have done is we have applied a simple filter, and we are looking at our data. At any point of time, if you do not want the filter, then what I can do is I can select this, and I can say, well, I'm interested in all the data. So I could do this, or you can clear the filters from area and you get your data back. So that's in one way you can filter out your data. So let's look at an example of sort and filter, where we might have to filter the data based on two columns or multiple columns with different kind of values, where it could be and or condition. Now say for example this is the data I have, and this is the question which we need to answer, such as find the list of all houses in the central region with pool and South County without pool. Now, if it was a simple filter based on one cell, I could have just selected my header row. I could have then applied the filter, and once I have the filter, I can look in area where I have three regions. So I'm only interested in central and South County. So I can get rid of North County, and that's fine. But then we have two different conditions here. So we need the data in central region to have the value for pool being true, and for South County the value has to be without pool. Now how do we do that. So what we can do is we can first create a copy of these headers here. So let me do that. Now the area has to be South County. So basically I can either just select this and I can choose this value, and then I can select this and then I can choose central. So that's the criteria which I have, and the pool value has to be, so central region should be with pool. So then this one basically has to be true, and this one has to be basically false. So South County is without pool. So let's select one of the values here, and this is my criteria. Now to get my result, we can always place your cursor here and you can check this is M column and 8th row. Okay, so we would want the result here. So let's go ahead and now click on data, and then in filter you have an option called advanced, and here what I can do is I can say I would want to filter the list in the place, but that's not what I would want to do. So I'll say copy to another location, and here if you see the list range will tell me that this is the data. So A1 to J126, so A to J column selected and all the rows. Criteria range is basically based on what I've given here. So that is M from 1 to V, which is 3. So I'm selecting these columns and then I'm saying all the way whatever criteria I've given, and copy to, I'm saying M8 to V8. So that basically will give me my filtered result. So you could basically just say okay, and now I have my data which has been filtered, and I have my area which is South County, that is without pool, central with pool, again South County without pool, and then if you look at your central value, that's pool. So this is an advanced filter which we have applied, where simply we have filtered the data based on 2 columns and then we have our result. So in this way you can have your customized filter applied on 2 different columns and get your data, which can be either replacing the existing content, or in the same sheet in different set of columns and rows you can have your result. Let's look at one more example of filtering where you are trying to filter the data based on an AND condition being met in 2 different columns, and then you would want to filter out the data for only specific columns. So the situation is the agents with a house in North County, that should be county, area having 2 and a single type family. So we are talking about 2 bedrooms, and we would basically have a single type family, and here the criteria is that we would want to only populate these columns, which is agent, area, bedroom and type. Now what you can do is, as I explained earlier, that you can get your result in the same sheet in a different location. So here I have created these headers which says agent, area, bedrooms and type. Now this is basically a copy of all the columns what we have here: agent, data listed, area, list price, bedrooms, bath, square feet and so on. So you can basically create a copy of the headers here, and this is where we will give our advanced criteria to filter the data. So the conditions which need to be met is we need to look at North County. So for example, here in area, I can basically go ahead and select one of the values, North County. Now the criteria is having 2 bedrooms only. So let's say bedrooms, and let's say the value should be 2. And then basically I am saying a single type family. So when you would want the single type family, so here under type, I can give the criteria single type. So this is my AND condition. So we are saying North County area having 2 bedrooms and the type is single family. Now this is the criteria, which basically means if I select this one tells me that this is M one row onwards till V2. So this is what we have, and we would want to filter based on this. So let's go ahead and then go for data, filter, advanced. And here in advanced, it says filter the list in place. Now that's not what we would want to do. So I'll say copy to another location. This basically selects the list range. So which is telling me A1 to J126. So that's the columns and rows selected. Criteria range is based on M1, V2, which we have given here. And copy to, I would say, for example, from M7 to P7. Now this is the area where this is the place where I want the result. Let's say OK. And now I get my data, which is based on the question which has been asked, that you would want the agents with a house in North County area having 2 bedrooms and single type family. So in this way, you can basically do advanced filtering, get your data and get it stored in the sheet anywhere at a different location. Well, I could have also done filtering in place, and that would have replaced the data which we have, but that's not what we want. We would want the filtered result in a different place. So this is how you can do some advanced filtering. We can also use Excel to filter out the data in one particular column, which might be conditional or say using some numerical filters. Now here, say for example, the problem statement is that you would want to display all the houses whose list price is between 45,000 to 600,000. Or say for example, we would want to filter out the data to something else. Say for example, let's say I would want to filter out the data between 300,000 and 400,000. So we can basically update this. Say for example, I'm saying I'm interested in 300,000 to 400,000, and that's the criteria to filter out the data. Now there are two different ways, or there are two easier ways to do it. One is I would want to look at the list price. So I can select this, I can go ahead and do a filter here, and in the list price, now this is where we would want to do the filtering. So it's pretty easy. You can click on this one and then you can go into number filters and you can choose between. Now that's one easier way of doing it. So I could basically select this. I could say I'm looking for value which is greater than or equal to 300,000 and then is less than or equal to 400,000. So if I just do this, I have applied my filter and I have my data which is filtered based on my criteria, right? So that's one easier way of doing it. Or let me do a Control Z. Now let the filter be there, which you can anyways use. But what we can also do is, as we have seen earlier methods, so get a set or get your column headers here, and then you are giving two columns here. Now the only difference between my this set of columns, which I have 1 2 3 4, and then you have 7 and 10 columns, and if you see here we have 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11, right? So whenever you want a AND condition, you will basically add the columns where I can give add condition if it is the same column. If it was a different column, then it would be same number of columns, but AND conditions will lie in the same line and OR condition would lie in a different line. Now here I can give this value, so I am looking for listed price being between 300,000. So I am saying it should be greater than or equal to 300,000, and then I can say less than or equal to 400,000. Now that's my criteria, and then I need my result here, which is in M7. So what I can do is, once I've given my criteria which I'll be using to filter, I can get into data, I can get into advanced, and then I can say copy to another location. So it is selecting my A1 to J126. Criteria range is based on M1 to W2, and then I would want my result from this particular column. So let's say OK, and now you have your data filtered out in a different location in the sheet, which has been filtered based on your AND condition. So you can filter out the data in this way, or you could just apply a filter on a column and give the conditions. Now let's solve one more interesting problem. And here we would want to use Excel, where we would have an and, an or condition. So say for example, this is the data given to you, and the question is that you would want to find all the houses in North County. Again, that's a spelling mistake, but then they are North County area with a list price greater than 300,000 and having 3 or 4 bedrooms. So the bedroom has conditional, so it has or 3 and 4, and then basically you have list price which is greater than 300,000. Now I could have obviously selected the columns and then basically gone for a filter. So I can just do a filtering here, and then I'm looking for list price being greater than 300,000, so which we can always give a number filter, and I can say greater than, and then I can say greater than or equal. So I can say greater than, and then I can give 3,000, 30, 300,000, and that's basically the filter which we would want. And here I would want to select the bedrooms, which should be just either 3 or 4. So if for example here I go in here and I unselect this and then I say 3 and 4, right? So I am getting my data which is greater than 300,000, and it should have the bedroom values which will be either 3 or 4 selected. Now that's one way of doing it. Let's do a Control Z and get it back to as we were, or you can even just say clear filter, so you get your data back as it was. So what we can do is we can here give the criteria. So for example, I have my list price. Now this is what I would want as a condition. So let's say greater than 300,000, and bedrooms should be 3, and then I can say greater than 300,000, and then I can say 4. So this one basically gives me a situation where your list price has to be greater than 300,000 and bedroom should be either 3 or 4. So we have given our filtering criteria. Now to get the result, what we can do is we can go into data, we can go into advanced, and we can say copy to another location. So our list range is selected, which is columns A to J, row number 1 to 126. Your criteria range is given in M1 to V3, where we have specified, and we are saying the result would be in M7 to V7. So if I do this, now I have got the same data which we were seeing earlier, and here the bedroom values are 3 or 4, and basically the list price is greater than 300,000. So this is a simpler way in which you can create your filters. And all this advanced filtering, what we are seeing, it will be saved with your sheet. You can always go back and change this value, or you could do filtering where one person has to look into the filter to see what values have been selected. Now that we have looked into some operations which we can perform in Excel using filter or sorting the data, creating your tables, let's also quickly look at functions and formulas which can be used for doing some easy calculations or computations. Now, Excel can be used in different kind of data analysis. So for example, you have different inbuilt functions which can be used, and we can always check for a particular function. So for example, if I wanted to look at a particular function, I could just type in here something, for example is, and then it shows me all the possible functions, and you can always have a look at the detail of the function. For example, you have is even, which will return true if the number is even. If we would say is logical, so I could search for is logical, and that tells me whether a value is logical value, true or false, and returns your value true and false. Now we can obviously say subtotal, so you can search for any of these useful functions, and that tells me what this function can be used for. So returns a subtotal in a list or a database. You have many other such functions such as integer, sum, average. You may be interested in working on truncating some data, getting the absolute value, getting the square root, basically getting a count or getting a max value. You can look for any particular functions within your Excel sheet. Now you also have other functions such as now or time. For example, let's look at now function. So I can search for now, and here it is. So this is returns the current date and time formatted as a date and time. So this is the function which we would want to use, and if I just give the function, it tells me what is the current time. Let's first look at the description of time here. So say for example I would want time. It says converts hours, minutes and seconds given as numbers to an Excel serial number formatted with a time format. So for example, if I would say 2 hours and then 30 minutes and 30 seconds, and if I do this, it has basically converted this into your time format. So you can always use different inbuilt functions for your work. Now we will also look at some advanced functions like sumif or sumifs. You have countif and countifs, and you can be working on various functionalities of Excel to easily help you in doing some calculations, computations, working with your data, working with your different cell values. So let's look at some example of using functions like sum or sumif. So for that, let's go to this sheet, and here we have some data. Now I have already applied a filter which can allow me to filter out the data. So it says find the total units that were sold in the East region. Now we know that in region we have East, and I have multiple regions. I could basically be saying unselect all and select only East and say OK, and that basically gives me the units which were sold. And if I placed my cursor here, and then if I did a auto sum, so it would basically give me the function which is being used, so something like subtotal, and it is basically working on your rows which is E2 to E44. And here we can just do this, so that gives me the total. But this is fine, you could do that, but it would be good if we know how do we use a function like sumif to do that. So here I'm seeing this is the subtotal where I'm looking at the values, and basically what I have done is I have filtered out the region, and then basically I'm getting a count. But this does not give me clearly how a sum was calculated from all the values which were listed. What we can also do is let's do a Control Z and let's get it back. So now we have our data, and we would want to get the total units that were sold in the East region. So what I can do is I can start typing in my formula, and for that I'll use an inbuilt function. So for example, I would be interested in going for sumif. Now it says sumif adds the cells specified by a given condition or criteria. When you talk about sumifs, this is when you could give set of conditions or multiple criteria. So let's look at sumif. Let's do this. Now obviously this gives me an error because the formula is not right. So we have to basically come in here and let's start with sum if. Now when I say sum if, it shows me there is a function with sum if which we would want to use, and here once I open up the bracket, it tells me, okay, what is the range of data which you are interested in. So I'm interested in all the units that were sold in the East region. So we are interested in the region which is here. So I can basically be selecting this, and this tells me you are interested in the data here. So let's not take the header value. So let's say B2, and then we can go all the way to the end. So we can basically select this way. That's the data we have. Select this and hit enter. So now here it has selected B2 to B4, but we need to basically now give the criteria. So the criteria is either a value or you can point it to a cell which has that particular value. So as per our problem statement, we are looking for the units which are sold in East region. So I can select the value East here, and then my sumif needs the range on which you want to calculate a sum. So let's select this, and now we are interested in finding out the sum of units. So that's basically this column, E column. So I can basically type in instead of selecting. So I can say E, and I'm interested in E2 to E44. So that basically selects the area or all the values. And now let's do this. So that basically gives me the sum is 691. Right now, this is the criteria where I have pointed it to a cell and whatever value that cell has. Well, I could have done something like this. So I could have selected East, giving the value, and then doing it. It still does the same thing, and in this way you have more clarity that you are using sumif. You are filtering the data, so you have given the rows, you are given the criteria, and then you have given the range on which you would want to sum up the values. Now similarly, if the question was what was the total revenue generated from binder, now we would want to find out what is the total revenue generated from binders. That means my filtering criteria will be binder, and then I want to find out the total revenue generated. So we have the revenue generated field also here, and we don't have any region to be filtered. We are just looking for binder. So let's again start doing the same thing. So we can go for sum if, we can open the bracket. Now it needs the range, so we are interested in revenue generated. Now that's the summation we want, and we would want to get the range of data. So here we can basically select D2 to D44. So that's the data selected. Now I would want to give the filtering criteria. So let's say binder, and then we need to give the range on which the sum needs to be calculated. So that's my revenue column. So that's G. So I can say G2 to G44, and that basically selects the column, and then you get your sum. So it tells me what is the total revenue generated from binder. Now I could be doing this for other things also. So say for example, if you would want to filter out something else, you could basically just drag and drop here, and then I could come here and change this to, say, instead of binder, I would be interested in, say, pencil, if that's the criteria you are interested in. Remember to change this so that you take all the values, and here we will change it to select the relevant rows, and then this is the data I'm getting. So I know that this is the revenue generated from pencil. this is the revenue generated from binder. Now this is a simple use case where we are using sum if. What if we would want to use some ifs? So some ifs, let's have a look at how we get to some ifs. So some ifs is where you would want to work on doing some calculation, but then you would want multiple criterias to be met. So let's see how we get this. So here what I can do is, let's work on this problem statement which says what is the total revenue generated from central region where the item is a pencil. So that's something which I would want to check. Now when we are answering this question, we can also look at the order in which things have been asked in the question. So it says what is the total revenue generated from central region. So we need the total revenue generated. We know there is a revenue column. We are interested in getting the total revenue generated. We are saying the filtering criteria is central region, and we say in that we would be interested only in the item if it is pencil. How do I do it? So I can use some ifs where you can pass in multiple criteria. So let's start with some ifs. And when I start with some ifs, let's open up the bracket. So it says sum range, it says criteria range, then it gives one criteria, and you can give in any number of criterias. So for example, we are interested in total revenue generated. Now that's my G column. So let's follow in the same order. So let's say G2. So that's my first value. And then I know there are 44 rows here. So I can say G44. And you can obviously check if that has selected all the rows. Now that's my total revenue generated. So I would want the total revenue generated. So I'm saying setting this sum range. Then I need to give the criteria range. So it says from central region. So central region comes into column 2, that's B. So let's say B2 to B44. So that's my criteria range. Then you have to give your criteria, but we need to filter out the region being central. So let's select this. Now either I could point to a value in the cell, or I can just give the exact value here. We can also give a wildcard or matching pattern, so that also works. Now this one is fine. We are now also interested in finding the total revenue generated when the region is central and the item is pencil. How do we do that? So for item, we know the column is D2. So let's select D2 to D44. So that basically selects all the rows in the D column, and we need to give the filtering criteria. So let's do a comma and then just give in our value. So let's say pencil, and then let's close your bracket, and that basically gives you the result. So we need to just follow the order of our question, which says what is the total revenue generated. So we are looking at the revenue column, we are selecting all the rows. Then it says from the central region. So we need to select the region column and give the filtering criteria as central, or point to a cell which contains that value. And then it says we would be interested only in item being pencil. So then you select the column which has all the items and provide your filtering criteria, that is pencil. So that's your easy calculation of using sum if, which we compare with sum if here. So sum if here was just having your criteria. So basically you are selecting your rows, giving your filtering criteria, and then your sum range. In sum ifs, we are giving multiple condition. Now same thing can be done here. It says how many units were sold by sales representative Jones where the cost of each item was greater than 4. So how many units were sold by sales representative. So when we talk about how many units, that's your E column. So let's start with that. So let's say some ifs. I would be interested in E column. And let's give the range. So it says some range. So those are the number of units on which we would want to find the sum. Then it says you need to give the criteria range. So we say sales representative, where the name is Jones. So sales representative is in sales rep column C. So let's say C2 to C44. Now then we need to give our filtering criteria. So let's say Jones is the sales representative where we are interested, about whom we are interested in. And then the question says where the cost of each item. So cost of each item is what we are interested in. You have unit cost. So that's what we are interested in. So that would be F, and then say F2 to F44. And then you need to give your cost. So it says where each item is greater than 4. So let's select this and let's do this. So this tells me 301. Now, similarly, let's answer our third question, which says how many units did Jones sell excluding pencil item? So we would want to find out what was the total number of units that were sold, and that units or that should not include the pencil item. How do we start doing this? So let's start with some ifs. Now we know that you start with some ifs, you need to give the sum range. So we are interested in the number of units. So let's basically go in and select our number of units which were sold. So that's your column E. So I can say E2 to E44. That's where I would want to perform the sum. Now I'm saying how many units that were sold, where we are talking about sales rep being Jones. So let's select the columns C and then give the range. After that, we need to give our filtering criteria, which is Jones, and then we are interested in the items, but excluding pencil. So items is in column D. So let's say D to D44, and then we have to give our criteria. So we can say, well, that should exclude pencil. So I can basically say pencil, and let's close this and let's check. So that's my formula, which says that these are the number of units which the sales representative, whose name is Jones, had sold, and that does not include pencil as an item. Let's also look at an example of using countif or countifs. Now, both of these can be very useful when you would want to calculate certain values. So for example, if I would want to work on countif, let's try solving this problem. Now, remember, you can answer these questions using filters, and that can be an easier way. But then sometimes you may want to get the formulas so that you can make your spreadsheet and your calculation more dynamic in nature, and that will basically depend on the values in the columns or rows. So for example, if I have find the total number of times Gil has made a sale. Now if I look at my data here, it tells me that for every sales representative there is some value in the sale, and it says sales has greater than 3. So for example, Jones, you have sales greater than 3, or you have Jardine, which is sales greater than 3, and so on. So what we are interested in is doing a quick count and finding out the total number of times Gil has made a sale. How do we do that? So we can use this countif function, and if I go into countif, it says counts the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition. Now what's our condition? Our condition is Gil, and we would want to find out how many times the name say Gil appears or Gil has made a sale. Now I could just say count if and then open up a bracket. I need to give a range. So let's say we are interested in looking at the range. So let's say we will choose sales rep. So I can say C, and then I can say C2 to C44. Now that's my range. Let's not give that in quotes. So you have to give a range. So let's do a count if that selects the data, and then we need to give the condition. So for example, let's here give the name, which is Gil, and then close this. So that basically tells me it is 5 times Gil appears here. We can check this. So I can go in here, I can add a filter, and then might be I would be interested in looking at only Gil, and that basically gives me 5, right? So we can always do that, and we can be using formulas like this. Now what about this question? So which basically says which sales representative made a sale more than 3 times. Now it might be looking little confusing when I say, for example, let me clear out this filter. Now we have sales greater than 3, and we would want to find out which sales representative made a sale more than 3 times. Now I could basically check for every sales representative here if they have made a sale more than 3 times, and what I can do is I can just say equals, I can start with count if, then I need my filtering criteria. So that's your range. So first thing is we will choose, for example, let's choose C2 to C44, and then we need to give an criteria. What is the criteria? We need basically a sales representative. So I can choose the value here in C2, and then I can close this, and then I can say the sale has to be greater than 3, and let's check. So it tells me the boolean value that yes, this guy has made sales more than 3 times. And what we can do is we can just drag and drop, which basically gives me the value for other sales rep. You can always check the value is automatically changing to this value in cell. And for example, let's go in here. So this is obviously 2, so it says me false, right? And you can basically get the values for all your values. So that basically tells me which sales representative has made a sale more than 3 times. Now, like sumifs, we also have countifs where you can give multiple criterias. So for example, the question is how many orders were placed from the East region after this particular date. So we have a date criteria, we also have the region criteria, and we need to basically get the count of number of orders which were placed. Now I can in this case use count ifs, and this basically says that you can start with a criteria. So it says how many orders were placed from East region after particular date. So date is in my first column. So for example, I could say A, start with 2, and say for example, let's go A44. That should have selected all the rows, and then I need to, once I've given the criteria range, I need to give the criteria. So we are saying the date has to be greater than 10th Feb. So let's give it 2/10/2019, and then you need to say how many orders were placed. So you need to give the criteria, second criteria range. So we are looking at the number of orders which were placed from the East region. So when I would want to look at the region, that's your column B. So I can basically say B2 to B44, and here I would basically give my criteria. So the criteria is East. Let's give that. And once you have done this, you would want to find out the total number of orders. So let's select this. And if I do this, it tells me 13. Now, is that right? So we are looking for your date, your region being East, and then getting the total number of orders. So here I can just do a count if I'm saying A2 to A44, wherein I have given the date criteria that it should be greater than 10th Feb, because I do not want to count 10th Feb. It says after 10th February. And then you are saying the region has to be East. So we would want to find out the total number of orders. So my region is East, and that gives me the result. Now, similarly, you can also find out how many times Gill sold pencils. So here we will have to give the range. So let's start with count ifs. Now here I would want that item is pencils, so we can as well select column D to D44. Then you have to give your criteria, so that's your pencil, and then we are looking for sales rep, which is Gill, so that is my column C. So let's say C2 to C44, and the value should be just Gill. So it tells me it's twice where Gill has sold pencils. So we can obviously check this by going in here, choosing my filter, and then let's search for rep being just Gill. Okay, and now we are interested only in the item being pencil. So I can say, well, let's get to pencil only, and that tells me twice. So you can obviously re-verify using filters, but using functions or using formulas, it is always good to calculate, and that can be making your computation and calculation more dynamic. Let's look at one more interesting feature of Excel, and that's your conditional formatting. Now, as you see on the screen, conditional formatting has different rules which can be applied on your data, and that allows you to basically differentiate or easily identify data values which are based on certain criteria or rules. So when you talk about conditional formatting, you have different options, such as you can highlight cell rules, you can get top and bottom values, you can apply different rules, apply different color scales, and you can easily manage these rules. So conditional formatting is very useful for people who would want to work on huge amount of data and easily perform some data analysis. It's easy to use as it is shown here, and with your conditional formatting, you can format cells based on a preset condition. You can perform conditional formatting to identify cells. You can highlight a few significant cells, and you can easily perform conditional formatting as shown on the left side. Now, how do we work with conditional formatting? Let's have a quick look. So say, for example, we have our Excel sheet, and if you see here, I am highlighting the salesperson who have generated revenue greater than 10,000. So we can be looking at the values where the revenue generated by a particular sales person is greater than 10,000. It has a particular color. And how do we get here? So for example, let's select this data, and what I could do is I could go into conditional formatting. Now I could basically highlight cell rules, and we could just say greater than. That's an easier way. I could also go ahead and create a new rule, but then I can use one of this option. I can say greater than, and let's give some value. Might be we would be interested in looking at any value greater than 12,000. So let's choose 12,000. And here it says what color would you want to select. So for example, I would say something like yellow filled with dark yellow text, and let's say okay. So right now what I'm doing is I have all the values where the revenue generated was greater than 10,000, but then I have also selected all the sales people who have made or who have generated revenue greater than 12,000. So I can just do a control Z to see the previous result. Now here I had the values which were greater than 10,000, and the one which we did just now basically highlighted the values which are greater than 12,000. So this is one simple example. Now we can look at some other examples. Say for example, you want to format cells using 3-color scale. So if you look at the values here, I have a 3-color scale mainly in green, yellow, and red. And how do you do this? So for example, I can go in here and I can go to conditional formatting. So I would want to go for color scales, and here you can create different rules. So we can set up a 2-color scale. So we can say format only values that are above and below average. I can format only cells that contain something. I can get the top and bottom value. So these are different ways in which I can have a 3-color based scale. Now what I will do is I will select this, and let me show you the rule which I have. So for example, I can go into manage rules, and if you see here, there are certain rules which have been specified. Now what does that mean? So you would want to specify a 3-grade scale. So for example, if I would want to look at my first rule, it tells me that I'm choosing 3-color scale. I can choose lowest value, percentile, and highest value, and that basically will select the cells based on their values. So what we could have done is I can basically use one of these values. I can delete these rules which I have created. So for example, I have all these rules, but you should always carefully remember that the rules will be applied in the order shown. So for example, if I just delete these rules and then say apply and say okay, my data is back. Now it does not have any highlighting. Now I can go in here, I can say conditional formatting. I could go for color scales, or I could basically go into new rule. So I would want the cells to be using 3-color scale. So let's choose 3-color scale. Now when you say 3-color scale, it says what will be the color of lowest value, and we could choose, might be any one of this. Let's choose red. I can say midpoint is percentile 50, and then the highest value is green. And if that looks good, let's say okay. And now if you see, the lowest values have been highlighted as red. You have mid values, and then you have the positive value. So this is the 3-color scale, and that easily helps me in identifying the data based on the cell values. Now in conditional formatting, what you can also do is you can basically color the cells based on their values. So what we are seeing here is if the revenue generated is greater than average, then that shows in green. And if the revenue generated is lesser than average, that shows in orange. Now, how do we do that? So we can basically again manage some rules. So I can basically create a new rule. Now here I can select one of the options which says format only values that are above or below average, and that's the option I would want to select. Now I can select this and it says format values that are above average. So in our case we had it in green. So for example, I'll say above average, and then here I can go for a particular color. So you can go for a particular size. So let's go and look into the formatting. So for example, let's choose yellow. Say okay. Now I'm saying wherever the cell values are above average, it would be yellow instead of green. And let's go in here. Let's go and look into manage rules. So this is basically the rule which we are applying. Now we can also add a new rule, and I need to select the values. So for example, I will say here, so we had gone for above, now we'll go for below. We'll go for format, we will choose red, we'll say okay, we'll say now these are basically the rules which we have created, and here it says applies to your data. So right now it has not been applied. So for example, if I select this and then I could basically choose my area, just hit on enter, and similarly you can go in here and then select your area, hit on enter and say apply, say okay. And now if you see, I have really chosen bright colors, but then I have said wherever my revenue generated is above average, it should be in yellow, and below average should be in red. So we wanted above average to be in green and below average to be in orange. So that's what we have here, right? So you can always color code your cell values based on some rules which you are setting up. Now similarly, you can also find the top 10 and bottom 10 values, and that's pretty easy. So you can just select this and then you can go into conditional formatting. You can go for top and bottom values, top 10 items, bottom 10 items, or you can go in for more rules. So you can say format only top or bottom ranked values. So you have top 10. Now you can choose the color, and for example I'll go for blue and I'll say okay. So now if you see, my top 10 values are blue. Now similarly I can add one more rule. So I can say new rule and I can say let's go for top or bottom. Let's go for bottom. Let's go for format. Let's say orange. Say okay, and that's it. So now you have your values which are top or bottom 10 values. So you are using conditional formatting where you are basically highlighting your cell values based on different colors, and here easy conditional formatting based on different rules helps us to do that. Now similarly, you can also have the values which is basically showing you how the values are increasing. So what we can do is we can select our columns. Either you could apply this to all the columns. Now here I have applied this only to Jan and April. Now I could apply this for June. So let's say June. So you can go for gradient fill, you can go for solid fill, you can obviously just select the color and that takes care of the things. You can say for example select this, and now this is selected, but I would want to might be format this. So I can go in here, I can go into manage rules. Now that will tell me what rule has been applied. in the order, so I can just do a edit rule, and that basically says this is a solid fill, which is color, you have no border, this is basically color is black. Now I can go for something like gradient fill, and I can say okay, and now if I say apply and okay, so this basically is like your first column. So you can use conditional formatting for various use cases, and you can highlight the values. So anyone who would look at the value would automatically notice which are the higher values, which are lower values. Might be here the revenue is getting generated or was getting generated but did not grow beyond a particular value, and so on. Now similarly, you can also go in for different options. Say for example, here we would want to see if the revenue was dropping, or if the revenue decreased, or say for example if the revenue was going up for this particular salesperson. So here we are looking at Carol. So in Jan the revenue generation by sales was very high, then in Feb it was falling down, in March it was kind of stable, then in April it went way below. So we can obviously work on this, wherein we can grade our cell values. So what we can do is we can go in for highlighting the cell values. Now you can go for color scales, you can go for icon sets, and this is where you can choose your different shapes. So you could choose one of these shapes. So for example, I would be interested in looking at the indicators like directional. I could go using this 3 arrows. I can go in for this color. I can choose directional, and then my values are automatically using directional. Now what we can also do is we can then go into manage rules, and that basically tells me what rules have been applied. So for example, the latest one is the icon set, which I have chosen. It shows the selected columns. I can obviously do a edit rule, and then I can choose. So I'm saying the format style is icon sets. I'm not using a data bar, I'm not using color scale. Now here I have chosen the style of icons, and then here you can basically give some values. So you have icon which is green when the value is greater than or equal to 67%. When I say hyphen or minus, it is less than 67. It's way below 33%, then you give this value. So you can obviously edit and easily highlight your cell values based on this icon set. So I can apply this, and that's how I use conditional formatting. So conditional formatting can be very useful if you would want to use icon set, if you want to use your data bars, if you would want to highlight particular values, if you would want to color code based on some calculation, if you would want to use a 3-color or a 2-color scale, or if you would want to just find out values based on some simple calculation. So conditional formatting is used extensively by data analysts, or people who are working business intelligence teams, or people who would want to use Excel to easily identify the data, easily identify the cells which contain particular value, or finding out less significant or more significant cells to then pull out values and carry out your computations, calculations, or analysis.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.